Hey everyone, I'm here today with Raad Ahmed. Raad, would love if you could just do a brief intro.
Yeah. Hey, EJ. Thanks for having me. My name is Raad Ahmed. I'm the founder and CEO of a startup called Law Trades, and we are a marketplace that helps companies hire from a vetted network of freelance legal talent.
That's great. How did you come up with this idea? This is, I think, pretty different. I watch a lot of different vertical marketplaces, and I haven't seen this specific one yet.
Yeah. Good question. I think the original inception of the idea, which looks very different now than when I first thought of it, came to me when I was in law school. And I didn't want to sort of take the traditional route of like graduating and working at, a law firm and spending 10 years there and trying to make partner. I was just like, I wanted to start my own practice and I wanted to do that in the same way that, Shopify sellers have been doing, selling e-commerce services, except I wanted that to happen with professional services. So when I realized that there wasn't really an easy way for lawyers to basically become independent and set up their virtual law firm on the internet and start accepting clients and getting paid for it and building up their online reputation, I started tinkering with this idea of how do we make more legal professionals independent? How do we build out a platform on the internet that allows them to sort of tap into certain tools that was only limited to law firms at the time, but how do we make that more accessible towards independent professionals? And then in turn, maybe companies will use them because they're way more efficient than some of the traditional options that's out there. So it's been kind of an evolution from that point to, of a standalone product to this kind of more verticalized labor marketplace focused on a specific niche.
That's great. So it sounds like you really wanted to help other lawyers, people graduating law school, start their own practice and become entrepreneurs and lawyers. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I have a pretty entrepreneurial like background. Before doing law trades, I launched another. It was like a web app for Facebook that basically allowed people to customize their Facebook cover photos, and that grew to about like 30 million hits a month at some point when Facebook kind of rolled out their feature for that. And
That's impressive.
um,
It's great.
yeah, made a decent like sort of six-figure income while still in law school, and just kind of, sort of got that internet product slash entrepreneurship bug. And I was like, this is what I want to spend the rest of my life doing and building is cool stuff on the internet. So it stemmed from this idea of like, how can we make more lawyers, entrepreneurs? How can we make them independent? I just think like that leads to a better, happier life when you have that freedom and flexibility. So yeah, it started with that, honestly. And it just kind of evolved and grew from there.
That's great. So I don't typically think of lawyers as entrepreneurial. I sort of assume that people who want postgraduate education, who are entrepreneurial, get an MBA. How did you go about validating your idea as you were thinking about this and sort of seeing the demand for people to start their own practices?
Yeah. So when I was graduating law school, I was pretty much entering one of the worst legal job markets in like history. So a part of it was sort of like, okay, like I might not get hired by anybody. And that's not just me, that's affecting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other lawyers all around the world. What do we do about that? And when I looked at sort of all these law firms that are kind of like, we're laying off people or just simply not hiring, the demand for legal work was still increasing. I mean, people needed lawyers, companies needed lawyers. So the demand was there. So there was just this imbalance of supply and demand, just like from a high overview macro perspective. And to me, like the logical sense was just like, what if we just got a bunch of these lawyers that are willing to offer up their services connected to, people or companies that are actually looking to hire them? And what if we built out different tools to make them more efficient instead of everything happening offline, which was sort of my experience working at different law firms and different sort of public interest organizations. It was very routine. It was manual. There was no dashboard. It was all phone calls and sometimes faxes. So I just thought it would just be a fun idea to sort of bring a lot of that information online and do something useful with that. So Yeah, that's. I mean, I looked at just other people, like why is it only creatives that can be independent? Designers and writers. Why not like white collar professionals? And maybe what we're working on is specifically the legal vertical. But I see this trend of people building out these hyper verticalized labor marketplaces across anything from management consulting to finance and disrupting the, McKinsey model, disrupting the Ernst & Young model. And what we're doing is kind of just disrupting the big law model, which, is not really the most fair, I guess, model for lawyers. But we can get into that later. But yeah, it just seemed kind of logical to me.
Got it. So I can think of how I might approach this. If I were in that position, I might try to go out and get some large clients first and then sort of see if I could subcontract that work to some of the lawyers I knew. But how did you approach validating this idea? Like, what in your mind was most important to validate, that lawyers would want to be entrepreneurial or that clients would use a service like this? How does that look like, and what were your thoughts then?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, and both, because it's a marketplace, you're kind of validating both of those needs. Like when you look at it from the side of a lawyer, an independent lawyer joining the platform, what you want to validate is, hey, can they actually leverage this for a source of income? Is there real dollars that is going to be passed from this? Because there's been plenty of companies before that just did lead gen that would charge the lawyers a subscription and sell them contact forms or like a lead gen form, and they would pay per contact and sort of take it offline. And I didn't want to build that kind of business. I feel like that's like kind of been there, done that. It was like the early late 90s or early 2000s directory websites or whatever. So that was one thing. And we started off in a pretty manual way. Like we used like the Square reader as a way to sort of like pass money back and forth before we actually built out a more automated payment platform. But that was one thing on the supply side. Like, will they earn enough to be, to stay on the platform? And then the other side, then on the demand side, which was sort of the harder one, and we pivoted through this a couple of times. We originally started with selling to everyday people with all sorts of legal needs. Then we kind of narrowed that down to small businesses and early stage tech companies. And now we've kind of sort of found product market fit within scaling pre-IPO tech companies with an in-house legal team. And for that, it was like validating, like, would they use something like Law Trades instead of like a traditional big law firm that has been around for 100+ years, where they have deep connections and relationships with, like, will they actually try out something new? And that's been a little bit of an uphill battle, but after COVID, most companies were forced to sort of cut their legal budgets in half and hire a bunch of remote workers. And, luckily, for us, I mean, the pandemic actually helped accelerate our growth because it forced companies into actually really considering us as a viable option. And since then, it just kind of has been snowballing.
That's great. So it sounds like you went through a few different iterations to figure out the right target market that would use this service. Typically when I talk to people, they're selling into HR departments. I'm assuming that is not the case with you all. Are you selling into operations? Are you selling into legal? How does that look like for finding the clients?
Yeah, we're predominantly selling into legal. So we predominantly work with general counsels or assistant general counsels or senior in-house lawyers. It depends on how the company is broken up, but there are some companies with just like one legal department, and the GC is the person that kind of manages all of the company's outside counsel spend, and he's the main decision maker. We have other companies where they have several different legal departments broken up by different practice areas with their own sort of niche specialized sort of team. And for that, we'll kind of approach it on a department by department basis. But yeah, it really is just selling to lawyers and people that are kind of managing the legal operations within a company. So yeah, we don't deal too much with HR teams, maybe a procurement team, but it's predominantly chief legal officers, general counsels, assistant general counsels, but people that are making all the legal hiring decisions are sort of the folks that we're chatting with.
Does this create any network effects? As you sell into lawyers, obviously they'll sort of know, okay, if they want to, they can go start their own practice and use Law Trades. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We have, we've actually had some people in both ways. We have had some people on the supply side actually get hired by a company and basically become the GC there, who then use law trades to hire another sort of team of remote freelancers. Um, there's definitely network effects on from just like a traditional platform perspective, right? Like the more talent and supply side you have, the faster matches, the better, the better experience and all of that. Um, and even on the on the client side and the customer side, it's a very like referral driven industry. Like when like you're not going to really be able to sell to general counsels via like a LinkedIn ad or a cold email. I think that helps for like just like maybe just a little bit of brand awareness, but it really is word of mouth driven. So for us, like getting a couple of customers and making them really happy and exceeding all of their expectations in terms of price, in terms of quality, in terms of product experience, and just really blowing them away just led to a lot of our growth because they went around and told all their friends and then their friends told their friends. So, and that's why like a lot of our kind of focus is on like community building and virtual events and in-person events. Not only is it fun just to like hang out with your customers and grab a drink with them, but also like it just kind of adds more fuel to the fire in terms of like spreading via word of mouth. And the same thing happens on the talent side as well. If somebody gets on the platform and they get hired and they get an amazing gig, and they tell their friends about it, and there's a lot of like LinkedIn is our main platform, so we always see people kind of posting about us, and they're just like, this was from a talent perspective, this was amazing, it was life changing, and like so much better than like the traditional staffing model, or so much better than working at a big law firm. So people take note of that, and then they apply themselves. They'll often share different opportunities with their friends if it wasn't a fit for them. So I think for these kind of like niche, I don't want to say niche, but very verticalized marketplaces, it really is important to just provide an amazing experience for both sides, because they're the ones that's going to drive most of your growth. It's not really like a SEO play. It's not really like an AdWords play. It really is just like, brick after brick, building community, gaining trust, and then giving them the tools to really go out there and spread the word.
That's a great visual. Sort of now, so you putting into place those pieces, and then you start to get a large enough community, and you start to basically snowball and build momentum. Is that right? Sort of the referrals start coming after you get those first pieces right, and everything starts building on it.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, we have like private communities for both sides. On the client side, we're throwing like workshops and events almost every week. We also have like an online private community for them. We have a separate Substack for them. We have a separate podcast for them. And on the talent side, we're actually about to roll out um, a Discord channel and recurring town hall meetings. And it really is like investing into the community. And sometimes that takes a while, and you're not going to see like immediate results in the same way that maybe a good AdWords campaign or Facebook ad or whatever kind of gets you immediately after you spend money. But once the ball gets rolling, and once you hit some kind of critical mass around a certain talent type or a practice area, it really just, yeah, it really does snowball. You're still putting in work. You're still like putting together amazing content. And like, we're about to do our first like annual conference next year, kind of bringing together the whole community. But it is a lot of upfront work. And I think it's important to just make sure you have the runway or you're cash flow positive, because there isn't really a blueprint out there for that. Most of, I think, like the marketplace hacks and articles out there is just very much focused around either selling to SMBs or selling to individuals, and viral growth marketing tactics and all of that. But for, I think, the next 10 years of different these kind of service tech enabled based marketplaces focused around specific industries, it really is a slow burn process, but it ends up just being amazing, because you get companies that expand, you get companies that refer you, you just drive really good word of mouth growth, and your ROIs are just, it's just amazing, because we did previously to this sell to SMBs, and we pivoted out of that market segment, and it's literally like night and day. So it's been pretty fun.
That's fascinating. So As I think about what you're saying, it sounds like you're basically creating a category. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but obviously there are people who start their own law practices. But again, it seems like something people maybe do later on after they have a few decades of experience. And so you're sort of building awareness for lawyers that this is something that they can do, and then sort of helping to create social proof and education about how to do that, and then a community to support. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty spot on. It is a different category. It's building into this internet economy around delivering services online. It's around building your, profile, your online profile reputation versus like your offline who people relationship. And I think a lot of lawyers, I think we're doing a good job of signing up lawyers that never really considered this a real possibility. And sometimes when people look at it, it's like, well, how big is the market for lawyers that are actually freelancers and this and that, and could it be small? But I'm like, like we have no idea how many lawyers that are in full-time jobs right now that are looking at us and considering that to be like a real possibility. And if anything, after COVID, what that sort of taught a lot of professionals is that just because you have a full-time salary doesn't mean that you're guaranteed a job, right? Like you can get fired at any point at any time and everything is just basically gone. But which is kind of, it's viewed, I think, like now, like post-pandemic, as a more riskier bet than like, okay, like I'm gonna diversify, I'm gonna build my book of customers, I'm going to not just be with one company for 10 years, I'm gonna work with 5 or 6 companies at once, and I'm gonna build up my reputation so that that can speak for itself, and I'll get hired in the future instead of just sort of working under one brand and one law firm and doing just one practice area for like multiple years. You can sort of diversify your skill set and just be more marketable, right? We already know like the future is going to be moving everything to digital, moving everything to the internet. And I think like, why not work, right? And now we hear about like all the stuff happening with Web3 and the metaverse and all that stuff. And that's all great. But like, who's innovating around work? Like, what does that look like in a Web3 world? And how do people and we're already changing that already as it is, right? Like when you join Law Trades and you get your profile approved, like you can get hired like within the same day. Sometimes, we've seen people get hired within minutes, right? And that's a very different process than like going on LinkedIn and browsing through jobs and submitting your resume and like waiting around for days and talking with a recruiter, going through a couple of rounds of interviews. It's really old school. And I think that, the value proposition with these sort of verticalized marketplaces is it brings hiring into the future. It creates opportunities for independent professionals way faster in a way more predictable way. And then companies in that process of making these lawyers into businesses, they're just way more easily hireable by companies, So like that's how that part sort of ties in, because now payments is seamless. Now there's a dashboard. Now there's spend predictability. They're not wasting time sifting through resumes and posting jobs and going through recruiters. It's just a direct connection. So, it'll be interesting to see that grow and play out. And yeah, it's a peek into the future of work. And honestly, I know everyone throws around that word
Yeah.
future of work, but we're actually doing it, right? We're connecting
Absolutely.
people.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So there's, a number of things that you just said that I really actually too want to kind of dive into and touch on. Before I go off on sort of the Web3 divergence that I imagine it sounds like you and I can go on, would love to talk a little bit about your product. I think these verticalized labor marketplaces are interesting in that they can be done in a way that makes it very hard for other competitors to come in. So if, for example, you're finding your customers and managing your business and doing your taxes all in one system, it's probably hard to leave that. There's a lot of lock-in. So I'd love to understand what your actual product looks like today. What are the pieces of it? And then maybe how is that priced as well?
Yeah. So there's two different experiences. One that is our customer client flow and one that's on our supply side. So from the perspective of a customer, let's say you're the GC at a big tech company, you essentially go onto Law Trades, create a position, and you're able to see a short list of candidates that is a good fit based around price, based on practice area, based on jurisdiction. Just there's at least like 50 or 60 different data points that we use to curate a short list for you. From that point, you're able to sort of say who you're interested in and who you're not interested in. So if you kind of put like a thumbs down or something, we'll ask for some quick feedback to kind of feed it into the system around like, like what could we do better and why you didn't like them. Was it because of the price? Was it because of like something else? So on and so forth. And then you can also request interviews. So for the ones that you like, you pretty much, send a couple of times you're free, hop on a quick call, chat with them. And then after the call, you can basically hire them with one click. You get like, a quick 1-page MSA to basically sign, scope out the work, and then you're entered into what we call an active engagement, where you could see, still from a client's perspective, who's working on what pretty much every, 30 minutes or every hour, see how much you're spending, see how much you're forecasted to spend. You can add more people, you can reduce, your team size. But the biggest value proposition is you now have one central portal source of truth for all your legal data and everyone that's basically involved into your legal operations. And in the future, we're going to kind of continue to build out more tools and project management tools and messaging tools that will allow you to even further kind of like centralize that information to one place instead of just being on multiple email threads, instead of like getting like 5 or 6 different invoices. And then payment is very seamless. We give you weekly updates on who's working on what. You get a nice clean invoice at the end of the month. You pay for it, and that's that. It's really built around people that are very busy, people that just want the right people, the right candidates ASAP, because they don't have a whole lot of time to go through the sourcing, and giving them just kind of a snapshot on whether they're on budget or not. So it's kind of like, it looks like it's very simple tools, but it involves a lot of like tinkering and tweaking behind the scenes to actually create that experience, which again is very different than a traditional marketplace where maybe you post up a job and get like 20 or 30 bids and they're all different price points. We kind of streamline that entire process. And then similarly from the talent side, if you create a profile and you get verified and approved, you go through a screening process through us. And if you get in, then you get like a feed of opportunities that's curated to your practice area, your ideal hourly rate or earnings that you want to sort of set out there. And with one click, you can apply with your LawTrades profile and then get notified when somebody wants to chat with you. And similarly, you can get hired and you use your dashboard to do all your work. And that acts as a way to receive payouts, a way to communicate with your different customers. You can imagine like, we try to put people in multiple engagements. So there's like a little toggle so you can jump from one company to another pretty seamlessly. You can, in the future, we'll probably roll out some features where you can kind of like, kind of engage with other colleagues that are working on, similar work and ask them for advice and feedback. But yeah, that's kind of how it works.
Got it. And so as a lawyer, how is your work product reviewed? Like, is it similar to Upwork or Fiverr that you get a review? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think with like reviews on marketplaces, you have one end of the spectrum where it's like the Ubers and TaskRabbits and all of that, which is like, okay, your transaction is complete, leave a 5-star review. For us, we're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum because this work is ongoing, right? So like the average engagement on LawTrades is anywhere from like, 8 to 12 months or sometimes even longer. So, it's not like, your project ends and then you leave a review. So it's actually a bit tricky. But we do it in 2 ways. We collect a lot of private feedback on a week over week basis, like how things are going. Are you sort of happy? How's the response time? What do you think about the work quality so far? And then we'll institute like month end reviews where you can get kind of more of a holistic view and pass on that feedback to people on the talent side. And then similarly, the talent network can also give us feedback on how their working relationship is with this particular customer and like where they could improve. And, we're looking to collect feedback from both sides and just make better and better matches, right? So if there's a customer that joins the platform and they're just like, like getting really awful like feedback from our talent network, like, that's a good data point to have to either kind of provide them with some feedback on what they could do better or potentially not like allow them to like hire more people if it's consistently like poor management or whatever. So it is a 2-sided review system. It's not like super transactional like an Upwork where the project just ends and you leave a review. It's more kind of, on a recurring, ongoing basis, but it's focused around just getting that level of transparency to make both sides better, and make them sort of perform better. And, we were even exploring the ideas of like allowing, both sides to even take like a mini little personality test and like, and get into like a deeper sort of,
That's
realm
interesting.
around how they work, and are they introverts, are they extroverts, do they like to work late at night, is it in the morning, and then match people even in a more deeper way, than just like sort of like the initial data set. And I think in the future we'll get closer and closer to that sort of like psychological based matches, because we have a whole lot of data around how everyone is working. Like we're processing, thousands of hours of work in any given month, and it's like, how can we sort of like make sense of all that and create an even better experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, obviously, assessments are a growing category where people who are applying for jobs have to do assessments to rate their skills. I didn't think about it from the freelance side, and it sounds like that's a possibility. I would imagine with the legal side, sort of the casework you're doing, there's probably some documentation that shows you're familiar with this. But this idea of then doing this personality mix on top of it, and I can totally see it from, how responsive are you, what hours you work, to your point, all those things would really go into it. Probably like email communication style. Do you use emojis or not, or exclamation marks? Like, do you want those or not want those? I
Yeah,
imagine all those things
exactly.
could be something that plays
Yeah,
a
and
part.
it's creating the framework around that. So it's like you can even maybe skip the assessment test and just look at like how people are working, and like leverage that data to make like certain assumptions of like who would
Yeah,
be best fitted to
yeah,
like work together.
yeah. That's a great point. So you started talking about Web3, and one of the things I've seen that's interesting to me is this company called Braintrust. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, yep, I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. So, what are your thoughts around their model? And just for people who are listening, Braintrust is a freelance marketplace on the development side. But one of the things they do that is interesting is that they give governance tokens, or the ability to participate in the decision making of Braintrust, to people who sign up and refer others. Have you thought about something similar for law trades, or is that just too far outside the scope?
No, I think we've definitely talked about it. I think for the last like year or two, and definitely seeing a company like Braintrust come out and actually implement it is really interesting. We definitely didn't want to be like the first company to do it, especially doing it within like such a regulated industry like legal, where it was just hard enough to just even like exist and compete directly with some of these traditional players. But I've been sort of tracking them. I think it's a really cool idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that there's definitely some overlap of like, we do something very similarly. And I know, we kind of before this briefly chatted about our RUV, which allows us to raise from our users and our customers. So we're kind of doing that in a similar way. We have, town hall calls around like new features. So there's like a lot of elements to like of what we're doing currently in terms of like making it very inclusive to our users, that we're doing without even kind of offering like a token. But I think I'd be curious to see how it sort of plays out. I know that their token is listed on Coinbase, and I think it's still too early to sort of like tell like, is that really driving a lot of the growth around, let's say, the supply side? We'll
Yeah,
see.
it's a different audience for sure. Developers versus
It's a different
lawyers. Yeah,
audience as developers, as designers, right? Yeah. So I think we've taken a different approach in terms of our fundraising strategy, but I think at its core, what we're both trying to do is get some skin in the game from our users on both sides of it, right? And like, I think that is an ultimate competitive advantage, is like if you turn, your customers and your supply side users into investors and give them on some of the upside. It's like, what would Uber look like if they did that for their Series A and allowed their drivers to invest into their round, right? So I'm curious to see how it plays out. I'm definitely interested in this space, and I think um, there's a lot of dynamics within a marketplace model where an idea like that, like offering a token and incentivizing people to like, complete profiles or make referrals, or you know, um, um, if their friend gets hired by a company, maybe give them some credit or give them some, some portion of the earnings from the person that got hired. So yeah, I think I'm curious to see how it will turn out. But I'm glad that there is a company that's doing it right now.
Yeah. So I think one of the things you touched on that we had talked about was the RUV. And I think this plays into the sort of growing ownership economy. And the RUV, as I understand it, is what's called a roll up vehicle. I think AngelList really came out with it, and it allows you as a founder to set up a special purpose vehicle or a way for smaller check writers to invest in your company. Typically, before this, maybe minimums would have been $25,000, or someone else would have set up an SPV and they would have charged carry and other fees. With the RUV, there's no carry. How has this been for you, sort of as a way to get either lawyers or potential customers involved? I'm just curious how that creates maybe a sense of ownership of the stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing tool. Like, you don't really come across too many tools like this invented specifically to help founders, and combines, with making the fundraising process like way more easier and way more seamless. But yeah, like it's like you mentioned, you just go on there, you create an RUV, you get this link, and you're able to collect checks directly from accredited investors for as low as $1,000. And we've had people put in well over six figures into it. And you can, close your round from strategics and like people that will actually really add value to the company beyond just the initial check. So we've had a bunch of our customers invest. We've had a bunch of strategics that we know could intro us to some of the bigger customers we want to work with invest. We've had a few people on the supply side invest. And it's totally different. It was a little bit scary at first because it's kind of like, do I know what I'm doing? There's not a whole lot of materials out there. I mean, I know we're part of the same RUV Alliance community, and that's been super helpful to just like navigate. And but it's so new, but it feels so right, And I think in the future, there's just going to be more and more companies raising money in this way. Especially, this kind of ties into our community discussion. Like, if you're doing a good job of building community within your product, within your company, then this just lends itself so well to this idea of raising money directly for them, because you built up the trust. And I'm pretty transparent with the company as well. Like, I'll post our revenue numbers on Twitter. I'll show them I'll show our users half finished version of our iOS app. And I think just this idea of building in public and being super transparent and almost acting like a public company, even though you're a private company, and raising via an RUV. I think that is the future of fundraising. I think less and less founders will sort of just be at the mercy of a VC and have a couple of closed door conversations and make a decision whether to fundraise or not because of them. And I think more people will just be like, yo, look, our customers are on board. They're the people that should be enriched in this process. And I have full control over it. I'm setting my own terms. So it's revolutionary, I think. And I hope more people leverage it.
That's great. And so it sounds like you're part of the whole build in public movement, which is a lot of fun and really interesting to observe. One of the things I have is a question for you on the RUV. This is something I sort of wonder about, but given who you're selling into, if you have customers who invest in you and they're sort of in the legal trade, how do they think about disclosures to the company? So if you're selling into a general counsel and they've invested in you, how does that look on sort of the inside? Like, what type of disclosures do they make to a procurement process?
No, that's a really good question. And I would say, especially if you're selling into bigger companies and you're trying to get a customer or a lead to invest, they'll most likely need to get approval for that, especially if they are a customer or they're considering, using your services or your company. But we've had people just be able to get that approval. We've had some folks that invested, but they were told that when it does come down to signing the deal, it would be somebody else that would be kind of leading the deal. instead of that exact person. So I think there's a couple of ways of going about it, but and it's still a relatively new thing. But as long as you, from a founder perspective, you're just kind of open and transparent with it, and you kind of just let your prospective customer just know, like, this is the information, and here are the deal terms, and do what you have to do to sort of get approval. I think there is, for most larger companies, a built-in process to facilitate that. So it might require a little bit more back and forth, or a little bit more of a wait, but I think it's worth it for both sides, and no one's going to get your. I mean, and it's a little bit of a side note, but this is, I think, the real powerful part is, like, no one's going to get your product as good as your customers. No VC, no sort of outside angel. Like, they truly understand the pain point, and there's going to have to be more companies being built around certain pain points that just a VC just doesn't understand because they've never experienced it. But that's no reason why they shouldn't get funded. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
Okay, that's great. You've disclosed some numbers with me. I think, as you mentioned, you build in public, and it seems like you all are doing really well, and that's exciting. What are you focused on next? So after you sort of, close out some of the financing steps that you're working on, what's the next thing that you're excited about building or doing with LawTrades?
Yeah, I think it's always like doubling down on the product. I think because we have such a strong community with a really open sort of feedback system, we get our customers sort of telling us what features they want next. So there's kind of the realm of just expanding out the suite of features that we have. Maybe inviting outside their other outside counsel relationships to our dashboard, so they have a better picture of their overall spend. We're definitely interested in potentially offering some SaaS upgrades to what exists on the dashboard already. Because we're so integrated, we kind of eliminate the need of like using a lot of different software and tools, and because it can just all happen, in one shot on our platform, whether it's like an ATS or an interview scheduling system or a time logging system or a separate invoicing system. Like, we sort of connect them all together. So we definitely heard of other sort of add-ons and potential SaaS upgrades around that. And I think for me, over the long term, I'm really excited about, obviously, like, we want to kind of double down and dominate within the legal space. But I think the tools that we're building is really applicable to many other verticals around this professionals category beyond just legal. Tools are very universal. They're built for knowledge workers that, think for a living. They monetize their brains, they monetize their thoughts. So, this can apply to people in finance. This can apply to people in, management consulting positions. This can apply to maybe HR professionals, right? Like, we don't really know, but they are universal. If you take out the word LawTrades and you just, use the product, it can pretty much work across anyone that's looking to become independent. So I think, like, experimenting and tinkering with this idea of, like, can this be even bigger than what we think it is really exciting to me, as well as some of the we kind of touched on it, like the idea of potentially offering, what does a token look like, and experiment, like, playing around with some of the incentives around that, and continuing to further drill down on creative ideas to get more people, more of our users being owners in the company. So yeah, it's around that spectrum of things.
Yeah, that's great. That is absolutely exciting. I hadn't considered the larger vision there, but that's exciting and makes a lot of sense. So maybe last question, and I think maybe you've touched on this, but what's a hypothesis you started with at the beginning of LawTrades that you either changed your mind about or now even have more conviction?
We changed our minds so many times. I mean, I think, when LawTrades first started, it was this little appointment booking system that connected people looking for, I don't know, like divorce lawyers or personal injury lawyers, to a website that allowed them to book appointments with them. I think that, the journey of building a startup is just, taking the hits, but like not taking it too personally, and really looking at why that sucked or why that was painful, and trying your best to extract some lesson, some truth from that, and being able to employ that as a impactful change, whether it's to the product, whether it's towards the go-to-market strategy, whether it's towards like, anything, marketing, copy, whatever. And especially when you're kind of in this area where there isn't a defined path and you're kind of creating your own category and you're convincing people to do something that never thought was possible, it's even more important to like really think for yourself and be okay with making changes. And we've always kind of had that in our DNA where like we were just struggling for a good portion of the beginning. And once we started kind of being open to like not just resisting certain inevitable things, like being able to pivot into a new customer base, things started working. And even to this day, we're still sort of like, why is this happening this way? Or why is that happening that way? And why did they end their engagement at this date? And they told us that date. And I think like it's just like just studying your startup under a microscope and doing that day in and day out for years is like the ultimate kind of, it's the ultimate learning journey. Like there's no book, there's no course, there's no like conversation you can have that can compare to like what you'll learn doing your startup. And I mean, I don't want to say that just like a broad thing, like, oh, you do a startup, like you're going to just like learn everything. But if you really are sticking with it and you're looking at this as a 10, 20, 30 year life project, you're going to change, you're going to evolve. You want to stay true to your mission of like what you're trying to do. For us, it's making professionals independent and democratizing services a little bit more on the internet. But aside from that, just being open to change and being open to the raw truth and feedback is what's going to just kind of keep you going. So I know that's a kind of a long-winded way of saying
great.
it, but
that's great.
We're always questioning ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that comes through that the introspective nature of the company that you all are running. And basically, it sounds like it allows you all to learn quickly and adapt and change to what the market is actually driving and wanting. So that's great. I really appreciate it, Raad. I think there were a lot of great things that you touched on in this. I think diving down into that community, the importance of that aspect was really insightful and helpful. So I just wanted to thank you for your time today and agreeing to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.